Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the New Horizon. Outside the big windows, space looked empty and dark. But Jake knew they were not alone. 3 years ago, his ship had made contact with aliens for the first time in human history. Now they were friends with a race called the Velkari. The Velkari looked nothing like humans. Their skin was clear like glass and lights moved under it in pretty patterns. They were tall and thin, with long fingers that could bend in ways human fingers could not. When they talked, colors flowed across their skin instead of words coming from their mouths. Jake had learned to read these light patterns. It took him 2 years of hard work, but now he could understand what they meant. Happy was bright yellow waves. Sad was slow blue ripples. Angry was fast red flashes. The other humans on his ship thought he was crazy for spending so much time learning alien talk. But Jake knew it was important. The most important Velkari was Princess Zarathel. She was the daughter of their king, and she spoke for all her people when they met with humans. Jake first saw her when she came onto his ship a year ago. Her skin was more beautiful than any other Velkari. The lights under it moved like dancing stars. At first, Zarathel did not trust humans. Her people were very smart and lived by rules and logic. They did not understand human feelings. But Jake was patient. He showed her that humans could be kind and honest. Slowly, her light patterns changed, from cold white to warm gold when she looked at him. Jake learned that Zarathel was different from other Velkari. She asked questions about human emotions that her people thought were silly. Why did humans cry when they were sad? Why did they laugh when things were funny? Why did they risk their lives to save friends? Her people had forgotten how to feel these things long ago. The princess started coming to Jake's ship every week. They would sit in the small garden room and talk for hours. Jake told her about Earth, about blue skies and green trees. He told her about his family back home, about his sister who was a teacher and his brother who was a farmer. Zarathel listened with lights dancing across her skin in patterns Jake had never seen before. In return, Zarathel told Jake about her world. It was a planet made of crystal caves that sang in the wind. Her people lived in these caves and got their food from the light of 3 suns. They had no wars because they solved all problems with logic. But Jake could see in her light patterns that she was lonely. Logic could not fill the empty space in her heart. Jake began to care for Zarathel in a way that scared him. She was an alien princess and he was just a human captain. Their people were so different. But when she looked at him with those strange eyes and when her skin glowed soft pink, Jake felt something he had never felt before. One day, Zarathel gave Jake a small piece of crystal from her home world. It was no bigger than his thumb, but it glowed with the same light as her skin. She pressed it into his hand and her lights turned deep purple. Jake had learned that purple meant something very special to the Velkari. It meant a bond between 2 minds that could never be broken. But not everyone was happy about Jake and Zarathel's friendship. Some Velkari thought humans were dangerous. They said humans were too wild and full of feelings that could not be controlled. These Velkari formed a group that wanted to fight humans instead of being friends with them. The trouble started when human ships found new planets to live on. Some of these planets were near Velkari space. The group that hated humans said this was proof that humans wanted to take over everything. They began to plan an attack. Jake did not know about this plan. He was too busy learning more about Zarathel and her people. He taught her how to play human games like chess. She taught him how to make his thoughts calm and clear like the Velkari did. They spent more and more time together, and Jake began to think that maybe humans and aliens could truly be friends. Then the attack came without warning. Jake was sleeping when alarms started ringing all over his ship. Enemy ships had appeared out of nowhere and were shooting at human colonies. The ships had Velkari weapons, but they were not flying like Zarathel's people usually did. They were angry and wild, trying to hurt as many humans as possible. Jake ran to the bridge and called Zarathel on the radio. Her image appeared on the screen and her skin was flashing red and white in panic. She told him that the group of angry Velkari had stolen ships and gone to attack humans. She said her father had sent ships to stop them, but they might be too late. Zarathel looked at Jake with those strange eyes, and her skin turned the deepest purple he had ever seen. She told him she was going to stop the attack herself. Jake begged her not to go. He said it was too dangerous. But Zarathel just smiled in the way she had learned from watching humans. The last thing Jake saw was Zarathel's ship flying straight into the middle of the battle. There was a bright flash of light brighter than a star and then nothing. When Jake's eyes could see again, Zarathel's ship was gone. There was only empty space where she had been. 2 years had passed since Zarathel died. Jake was no longer a captain of a peaceful ship. Now he was Colonel Morrison of the Human Defense Force. Earth had changed a lot since the attack. People were scared that more aliens might come to hurt them, so they built more weapons and trained more soldiers. Jake did not want to be a soldier at first. After losing Zarathel, he just wanted to go home to Earth and forget about space. But the military leaders asked him to help train new soldiers. They said he knew more about aliens than anyone else. Jake agreed because he thought maybe he could stop other people from getting hurt like Zarathel did. The training base was on a moon near Earth. It was a cold, gray place with no trees or birds. Jake spent his days teaching young soldiers how to fight alien ships. He showed them how Velkari weapons worked and how their ships moved. But he never told them about the lights under Velkari skin, or how they could be kind and gentle. 2 of Jake's best students were Lieutenant Amy Carter and Sergeant Kevin Blake. Amy was very smart and could plan battles better than officers twice her age. She had short brown hair and serious eyes that missed nothing. Kevin was a great pilot who could fly his ship through spaces that seemed too small. He had red hair and a big smile, but Jake could see sadness in his eyes too. Amy and Kevin worried about their teacher. Jake worked too hard and slept too little. He took dangerous chances during practice fights. Sometimes they saw him standing alone in his room, holding a small crystal that glowed with soft light. They did not know it was Zarathel's gift to him, but they knew it meant something important. Jake kept the crystal with him always. At night, when he could not sleep, he would hold it and remember Zarathel's voice. He remembered how her skin glowed when she laughed at his jokes. He remembered how she tried to understand why humans cried. The crystal still had some of her light in it, but it was getting dimmer every day. One morning, alarms started ringing at the base. Enemy ships had been spotted at the edge of human space. Jake looked at the pictures from the spy satellites and felt his heart stop. The ships looked like Velkari ships, but something was wrong. They were flying in angry, wild patterns. They had marks painted on them that Jake remembered from 2 years ago. Jake called his best pilots together. Amy and Kevin stood in the front row with 20 other brave soldiers. Jake told them they were going to fight the alien ships before they could attack human colonies again. He did not tell them that these might be the same aliens who killed Zarathel. The battle happened near a planet that humans had just started to live on. Jake led his squadron of small, fast ships against the larger alien vessels. Human ships were not as strong as Velkari ships, but they could move in ways that surprised the aliens. Jake had learned from watching Zarathel that Velkari always followed rules and patterns. So he told his pilots to break all the rules. They flew upside down and backward. They hid behind rocks and jumped out to attack. They worked together in ways that confused the logical alien minds. Amy used her smart planning to split the enemy ships apart. She sent some human ships to one side while others attacked from behind. Kevin flew his ship through a field of space rocks that the aliens thought was too dangerous. He came out behind their biggest ship and hit it with all his weapons. The battle was hard and scary. Jake lost 3 pilots, including a young man named Tony who reminded him of his brother back on Earth. But the humans won. They destroyed most of the alien ships and chased the rest away. After the battle, Jake studied the pieces of the alien ships that were left floating in space. What he found made him angry and confused. These ships had the same marks as the ones that attacked human colonies 2 years ago. The same marks as the ships that killed Zarathel. But that did not make sense. Zarathel had said her father sent ships to stop those bad Velkari. So why were they still fighting? Jake was looking at pictures of the ship pieces when Amy came to find him. She could see that something was wrong. Jake looked like he had seen a ghost. Amy asked him what was bothering him, but Jake just shook his head. He could not tell her about Zarathel. The pain was still too fresh. That night, Jake stood alone on the observation deck of the base. Through the big window, he could see Earth in the distance. It looked like a blue and white ball floating in the darkness. Jake held Zarathel's crystal up to the light, and for just a moment it seemed to glow a little brighter. Kevin found Jake there an hour later. The young pilot had been looking for his commander because new orders had come in. But when he saw Jake standing there with tears on his face, Kevin just stood quietly beside him. Finally, Jake told Kevin and Amy about Zarathel. He told them about the princess who had lights under her skin and a laugh like music. He told them how she died trying to save humans from her own people. Amy and Kevin listened without saying anything. When Jake was done talking, Amy put her hand on his shoulder. The next morning brought news that changed everything. The long-range sensors had picked up a new ship coming toward human space. It was moving slowly, like it was hurt or damaged, but the most shocking thing was the signal it was sending. The ship was broadcasting Zarathel's personal code, the one that meant she was a princess of the Velkari. Jake stared at the screen showing the approaching ship. His hands shook as he held Zarathel's crystal. The little piece of alien stone was glowing brighter than it had in 2 years. Somehow, impossibly, it seemed to know that its owner was coming home. But Jake had seen Zarathel's ship explode with his own eyes. He had watched the light fade from her crystal for 2 years. How could she be alive? And if she was alive, why had she stayed away for so long? Jake felt hope and fear fighting in his chest like two wild animals. Amy and Kevin stood beside him as they watched the mysterious ship get closer to Earth. Whatever was on that ship would change everything again. Jake just hoped his heart was strong enough to handle another shock. Jake's hands shook as he put on his spacesuit. The mysterious ship was now close enough to dock with the space station. Every sensor said it was really Zarathel's ship, but Jake could not believe it. He had watched her die 2 years ago. Amy and Kevin wanted to come with him, but Jake said no. If this was some kind of trick or trap, he did not want his friends to get hurt. So Jake went alone to the docking bay, carrying his weapon but hoping he would not need it. The airlock opened with a soft hiss. Jake held his breath as a figure stepped through the doorway. It was Zarathel. Her clear skin still had lights dancing under it, and her tall, thin body moved the same way he remembered. But something was different. The lights under her skin were brighter and moved in patterns Jake had never seen before. Behind Zarathel came another person, and Jake's world fell apart. It was a human man with dark hair and kind eyes. He wore a uniform that Jake recognized from the Deep Space Exploration team. But the most shocking thing was his skin. The man had lines of light running along his arms and face, just like Zarathel's natural patterns. Zarathel's skin flashed bright yellow when she saw Jake. It was the color of happiness. But there was something else mixed in. Purple lines moved across her arms, and Jake remembered that purple meant deep love and connection. But she was not looking at Jake when the purple appeared. She was looking at the human man beside her. The man stepped forward and held out his hand. "Colonel Morrison? I'm Commander Ryan Hayes. I know this must be confusing, but we need to talk." Jake stared at the glowing lines on Ryan's skin. They pulsed in time with Zarathel's lights like two hearts beating together. Jake felt sick and angry and confused all at the same time. He had mourned Zarathel for 2 years. He had carried her crystal and dreamed about her voice. Now she was here, but she was holding another man's hand. They went to a meeting room where Jake could take off his helmet. Zarathel sat across from him and her lights turned soft blue. Jake knew that meant she was sorry about something. Ryan sat beside her, and Jake could see that the glowing lines on his skin moved when he felt strong emotions. Zarathel began to tell her story. When her ship was hit in the battle 2 years ago, she was dying. Her body was broken and her mind was fading away. But Velkari ships were not just machines. They were partly alive, with computer brains that could think and feel. In her last moments, Zarathel did something that had never been tried before. She put her mind into the ship's brain. For months, Zarathel existed only as thoughts and memories inside the ship's computer. Her body was in a deep sleep that was almost like death. The ship drifted through space, damaged and lost. Zarathel could think, but she could not move or speak or touch anything. Then Ryan's exploration ship found her vessel floating near a dead star. Ryan was alone on his ship, doing a long mission to map new areas of space. When he came aboard Zarathel's ship, he found her body in the medical bay. She looked dead, but the ship's computers were still working. Ryan was a good man who could not leave someone to die alone in space. He tried to fix Zarathel's ship and wake her up. For weeks he worked on the alien machines, learning how they functioned. Slowly, he began to hear a voice in his mind. It was Zarathel, speaking to him from inside the ship's brain. At first, Ryan thought he was going crazy from being alone too long. But the voice knew things about the ship that Ryan could never have guessed. Zarathel guided him through fixing the most important systems. She taught him how Velkari technology worked. And slowly they began to talk about more than just machines. Zarathel told Ryan about her people and her world. Ryan told her about Earth and what it was like to be human. They shared stories and thoughts and feelings. Being trapped inside a computer had made Zarathel more emotional, not less. She could feel Ryan's loneliness and kindness through their mental connection. The breakthrough came when Ryan figured out how to wake up Zarathel's body. But something went wrong during the process. Instead of just bringing her back to life, Ryan's mind got connected to hers. Their thoughts began to flow back and forth like water between two cups. The connection changed both of them. Ryan gained some of Zarathel's abilities. He could see light patterns on his skin and feel the emotions of others. Zarathel gained some of Ryan's human emotions. She could feel joy and sadness and love in ways her people had forgotten long ago. But the biggest change was that they could no longer imagine being apart. Their minds were linked so deeply that being away from each other felt like missing half their soul. They were not just two people who cared about each other. They were two people who had become part of the same being. Jake listened to this story with his heart breaking into smaller and smaller pieces. He looked at the way Zarathel and Ryan sat together, their lights pulsing in perfect rhythm. They did not just love each other. They were each other, in a way that Jake could never compete with. When Zarathel finished talking, she looked at Jake with lights that were soft purple and gold. She told him that she had never forgotten their friendship. She said that learning to care about Jake had taught her how to open her heart to Ryan. But Jake could see the truth in her light patterns. What she felt for Jake was warm and kind, but what she felt for Ryan was like the fire of a star. Ryan seemed to understand Jake's pain. The glowing lines on his skin turned dim blue, which Jake realized meant sympathy. Ryan said he was sorry for hurting Jake, but he could not change what had happened. The bond between him and Zarathel was not something they had chosen. It was something that had grown out of their need to survive. Jake wanted to be angry. He wanted to hate Ryan for taking away the woman he loved. But looking at the man's honest face and kind eyes, Jake could not find any hate in his heart. Ryan was a good person who had saved Zarathel's life. How could Jake hate someone for that? Amy and Kevin came to the meeting room when Jake called them. They stared in amazement at Zarathel and the glowing patterns under her skin. They were even more amazed when they saw Ryan's light lines pulse in response to his feelings. Jake introduced them to the alien princess he had told them about, and to the human who had become something new. But Zarathel and Ryan had not come back just to explain what had happened to them. They brought news that made everyone forget about personal problems. The Velkari ships that kept attacking humans were not just angry aliens. They were being controlled by something much worse. Ryan's exploration had taken him to parts of space that no human had ever seen before. Out there in the darkness, he and Zarathel had discovered signs of an ancient enemy. Something that ate the minds of living beings and left their bodies empty. Something that had been sleeping for thousands of years but was now waking up. The attacks on human colonies had not been random. They were part of a plan to make humans and Velkari fight each other. While the two races wasted their strength on war, the real enemy was getting ready to devour them both. Jake felt the crystal in his pocket grow warm. Looking at Zarathel's glowing skin and Ryan's strange new abilities, he began to understand. Maybe losing the woman he loved was not the end of his story. Maybe it was the beginning of something much bigger and more important than his broken heart. The room was quiet as Zarathel and Ryan told everyone about the real enemy. Jake, Amy, and Kevin listened with growing fear to the story of the Devourers. These were not aliens with ships and weapons. They were something much worse. Ryan showed them pictures from his deep space mission. The images were hard to look at. Planets that should have been full of life were empty and gray. Cities stood like empty shells with no one living in them. Ships drifted through space with no one at the controls. Zarathel's lights turned dark red as she explained what the Devourers did. They were beings made of pure energy, who fed on the thoughts and feelings of living creatures. They would enter a person's mind and slowly eat away their consciousness. First, the victim would forget how to feel emotions. Then they would forget how to think. Finally, they would become empty shells that the Devourers could control like puppets. The worst part was that the Devourers were very smart. They did not attack strong races directly. Instead, they found ways to make different species fight each other. While the races wasted their strength on war, the Devourers would grow stronger by feeding on all the fear and anger. Jake thought about the attacks on human colonies and felt sick. The Valkyrie ships that had killed so many people were probably controlled by the Devourers. The real Valkyrie pilots were probably dead, their minds eaten away until only empty bodies remained. Amy asked the most important question. How do we fight something like that? Ryan and Zarathel looked at each other, and their light patterns pulsed together. Ryan said that their mental bond seemed to protect them from the Devourers. When two minds were connected like theirs, the Devourers could not get inside to feed. It was like trying to eat something that was locked in a safe. But making the bond was very dangerous. Ryan and Zarathel had only survived because they were both dying when it happened. They had nothing to lose. Most people who tried to link their minds with an alien would go crazy or die. Jake felt the crystal in his pocket grow warm again. He pulled it out and looked at the soft light glowing inside. An idea was forming in his mind, but it scared him more than any battle he had ever fought. How many bonded pairs would we need? Jake asked. Zarathel's lights turned thoughtful yellow as she considered the question. She said that the Devourer fleet was huge, but most of the ships were controlled by empty puppets. The real Devourers, the energy beings themselves, were fewer in number. Maybe 50 bonded pairs could make a difference if they worked together. Kevin laughed, but it was not a happy sound. 50 pairs? We have one pair that happened by accident, and you're telling us we need 49 more? But Amy was thinking like the smart officer she was. Not all the pairs have to be human and Valkyrie, she said slowly. Ryan proved that humans can bond with alien minds. What if we could find other aliens who wanted to fight the Devourers? Zarathel's lights brightened. She said that her people had been in contact with other races before the attack started. Many of them were also being manipulated by the Devourers. If they knew the truth, some might be willing to try the bonding process. Jake made his decision. He stood up and looked at everyone in the room. I want to try bonding with a Valkyrie. The lights under Zarathel's skin flashed bright white with shock. Ryan's glowing lines turned red with worry. They both started talking at the same time, telling Jake how dangerous it was. But Jake held up his hand to stop them. He had thought about this carefully. He was a soldier, and soldiers sometimes had to take big risks to protect others. If the Devourers were coming to destroy humanity, then someone had to be willing to fight them. Jake had already lost the woman he loved. He was not going to lose his whole species, too. Zarathel said that her sister, Princess Niravel, was on her way to Earth. Niravel was younger than Zarathel, but just as smart and brave. She had volunteered to help fight the Devourers, even though she knew it might mean bonding with a human. Amy and Kevin both said they wanted to volunteer, too. Other officers and pilots heard about the plan and came forward. Soon, Jake had a list of 20 brave humans who were willing to risk their lives to save Earth. Finding alien volunteers was harder. Most races were too scared of the Devourers to try something so dangerous. But Zarathel used her royal connections to reach out to other species. A few brave individuals agreed to come to Earth for the bonding attempts. The first bonding ceremony was held in the medical bay of the space station. Jake lay on a bed next to Princess Niravel, who had arrived that morning on a fast Valkyrie ship. She was smaller than her sister, with skin that glowed like pearls and eyes that seemed to see everything. Niravel had agreed to try bonding with Jake after talking to Zarathel. She understood that humans were different from Valkyrie, but she was curious about their emotions and their way of thinking. She thought that combining human creativity with Valkyrie logic might create something powerful. The bonding process was more painful than Jake had expected. Doctors from both species worked together to connect special machines to Jake and Niravel's heads. The machines would help their minds find each other across the gap between human and alien thinking. At first, Jake felt nothing except the cold touch of the machines. Then slowly he began to sense another presence in his mind. It felt like hearing a whisper from very far away. The whisper grew louder and clearer until Jake could understand that it was Niravel's thoughts. Niravel's mind was very different from a human mind. Her thoughts moved in straight lines and perfect patterns. She thought about problems by breaking them into small pieces and solving each piece one at a time. But Jake could feel her curiosity about his more chaotic way of thinking. The pain came when their minds tried to join together. It felt like two different kinds of music playing at the same time, creating a horrible noise. Jake wanted to scream and pull away, but he forced himself to stay still. Gradually, the two types of thinking began to find a rhythm that worked for both of them. When the bonding was complete, Jake opened his eyes and saw the world in a new way. Colors were brighter and clearer. He could feel Niravel's presence in the back of his mind like a warm, steady flame, and when he looked down at his arms, he saw thin lines of light glowing under his skin. Niravel sat up on her bed and looked at Jake with wonder. Her light patterns were different now, more complex and beautiful than before. She said that she could feel Jake's emotions as if they were her own. But more importantly, she could feel something else. A darkness at the edge of space that was moving toward Earth. The Devourers were coming. Their fleet would arrive in 3 weeks. Jake, bonded with Niravel, could sense them like a cold wind blowing from the void. There was no more time for preparation. The final battle was about to begin. Jake stood up and felt Niravel's strength flowing through him. Around the medical bay, other humans and aliens were preparing for their own bonding attempts. Not all of them would survive the process, but those who did would become humanity's best hope against the darkness that was coming to devour them all. The Devourer fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system like a dark cloud blotting out the stars. Their ships were black and twisted, looking more like living creatures than machines. Jake could feel them through his bond with Niravel, and the sensation made his skin crawl with fear. 3 weeks of frantic preparation had given humanity and their allies 43 bonded pairs. Not everyone had survived the bonding process. Jake had watched good people die as their minds broke under the strain of connecting with alien thoughts. But those who lived through it became something new and powerful. Amy had bonded with a brave warrior from the reptilian Skarn race. The process had given her scales of light that ran along her spine and enhanced her natural intelligence. She could now plan battles with a speed and precision that amazed even herself. Kevin had chosen to bond with a flying creature from the gas giant worlds. His partner looked like a jellyfish made of pure energy, and their bond allowed Kevin to pilot ships in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics. He could feel the movement of space itself and dance through it like wind through leaves. Jake stood on the bridge of the command ship, feeling Niravel's presence calm and steady in his mind. Through their bond, he could sense all the other paired fighters scattered throughout the human fleet. They were connected like points of light in a vast web, each pair unique but all working toward the same goal. The battle began when the Devourer ships crossed into Earth's defensive zone. They moved in perfect formation, like a machine army controlled by a single mind. Jake realized that most of the ships probably were controlled by one mind. The main Devourer entity was using the empty bodies of its victims to pilot the vessels. Human ships attacked first, using tactics that Jake had learned from his years of fighting alien vessels. But the Devourers adapted quickly to human strategies. Their ships began to move in new patterns, countering every attack that the humans tried. That was when the bonded pairs went into action. Jake led his squadron of paired fighters into the heart of the enemy fleet. Their ships moved in ways that confused and frustrated the logical Devourer minds. Where normal pilots would fly in straight lines and predictable curves, the bonded pairs danced through space like leaves in a storm. Jake's bond with Niravel allowed him to think with both human creativity and Velkari precision. He could see patterns in the enemy formation that neither human nor Velkari could have spotted alone. When he shared these insights through the mental web connecting all the pairs, the entire allied fleet began to move with perfect coordination. The Devourers tried to attack the minds of the bonded pairs, but their mental assaults could not penetrate the joined consciousness of two different species. The bonds acted like armor for the mind, protecting both partners from the hungry darkness that wanted to devour their thoughts. Amy used her enhanced planning abilities to direct the battle from the command ship. Her reptilian partner's memories included knowledge of ancient wars against the Devourers, and together they developed strategies that had not been used for thousands of years. Kevin and his energy-being partner flew through the enemy fleet like a ghost, appearing and disappearing in ways that terrified the Devourer puppets. His ship seemed to phase in and out of normal space, striking targets that should have been impossible to reach. The turning point came when Jake realized that the Devourers were not just controlling empty bodies. Some of their ships contained the real enemy, the energy beings themselves. These ships glowed with a sickly yellow light that hurt to look at. Jake called out to all the bonded pairs through their mental connection. He shared his discovery and proposed a desperate plan. If they could destroy the ships containing the real Devourers, the puppet fleet would lose its guidance and fall apart. The bonded pairs formed up into tight groups and charged toward the glowing enemy ships. The Devourers threw everything they had at the attackers, but the paired fighters were too fast and too unpredictable. They wove through the enemy fire like dancers performing an impossible ballet. When the first glowing ship exploded, Jake felt something like a scream echo through space. It was the death cry of a devourer, a being that had lived for millions of years feeding on the minds of others. The sound sent shivers through every bonded pair but also filled them with hope. One by one, the glowing ships fell to the coordinated attacks of the bonded fighters. Each time a real devourer died, part of the puppet fleet stopped moving and drifted helplessly through space. The enemy formation began to fall apart as its controlling minds were destroyed. The final battle was against the largest devourer ship, a massive vessel that pulsed with evil yellow light. Jake led the last charge against it, feeling the combined strength of all the surviving bonded pairs flowing through him. Niravel's logical mind helped him find the weak points in the ship's armor, while his human intuition told him exactly when to strike. When the great ship exploded, the remaining puppet vessels went dark and silent. The Devourer fleet was defeated, its controlling minds destroyed and its empty shells drifting like space debris. The solar system was safe. In the aftermath of the battle, Jake found himself changed in ways he had not expected. His bond with Niravel had grown deeper during the fighting, until he could barely tell where his thoughts ended and hers began. But unlike his feelings for Zarathel, this was not romantic love. It was something different and equally valuable, a partnership of minds that made both of them stronger. Zarathel and Ryan came to congratulate Jake after the battle. The three of them stood together in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars that were now safe from the Devourer threat. Jake realized that his heart no longer hurt when he looked at Zarathel with Ryan. His love for her had changed into something deeper and more lasting, a friendship that could survive any change. The victory over the Devourers led to a new age of cooperation between the races of the galaxy. The bonded pairs became ambassadors and explorers, using their unique abilities to help different species understand each other. Jake and Niravel took command of the first mixed species exploration ship, seeking out new worlds and new friends among the stars. Amy became the head of the new interspecies military academy, where young beings from many different worlds learned to work together. Her bond with the Skarn warrior had taught her that strength came not from being the same, but from being different and choosing to unite anyway. Kevin led the first squadron of bonded pilots, exploring the far reaches of space in ships that could move between dimensions. His partnership with the energy being had shown him that there were ways of traveling through the universe that no single species could have discovered alone. The Harmony Accords were signed on Earth 1 year after the battle. Representatives from dozens of worlds came together to promise that they would never again let fear and mistrust drive them apart. The document was written in dozens of languages and signed with lights, sounds, chemical markers, and energy patterns. Jake stood with Niravel on the platform where the accords were signed. Lines of light glowed under his skin, marking him forever as someone who had chosen to bridge the gap between human and alien. He thought about his journey from a simple ship captain to a bonded warrior, and he realized that every loss and every gain had led him to this moment. Looking out at the crowd of beings from across the galaxy, Jake knew that humanity had found its place among the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as partners in the great adventure of consciousness. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and now all its children could explore it together. The crystal that Zarathel had given him so long ago still glowed in his pocket, but now it was joined by a new light from Niravel's world. Jake carried both lights with him as symbols of the connections that could exist between any two beings who chose to understand each other. Humanity had learned the greatest lesson of all. The strength to survive and thrive among the stars came not from weapons or technology, but from the willingness to open their hearts and minds to others, no matter how different those others might be.